Hello and welcome to the Shed Sounds Media YouTube channel. My name is Ian Beabout, and today we will be taking a look at a new release from Rhino Records and Yes. This is the Fragile Super Deluxe Edition, containing 4 CDs, 1 Blu-ray, and 1 LP. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down what's included. So on disc 1, we have the original album remastered. This is the original mix of the Fragile album with a new mastering by Bernie Grundman. This is also the same mastering that appears on the LP. And I have some issues with this, but we'll get to them. Disc 2 is the Steven Wilson 2024 Remixes and Instrumental. This is Wilson's new mix, which is presumably a fold down of the Dolby Atmos mix included, as well as instrumental mixes for, I guess, 7 of the album's tracks. Disc 3 is Rarities, and Disc 4 is More Rarities and Live. The Blu-ray contains the new 2024 Steven Wilson Dolby Atmos mix, the 2024 5.1 mix, the 2024 Stereo Remix, the 2024 Stereo Remaster, and the 2024 Instrumental Mix. So the Blu-ray essentially encapsulates discs 1 and 2, as well as including the multi-channel mixes, the Atmos mix and the 5.1 mix. I do really like the packaging on this set. It replicates the vinyl size and also the original artwork by Roger Dean. And when you open it up, it's got the CDs positioned in a way that they won't get scratched up, which I really like. They actually lock and click into the cover. I really like that. The vinyl and the booklet, which is a reprint of the original booklet included with this album, they are a little bit tricky to finesse out of this set, and it took me a little bit of effort to figure that out. So just a fair warning about that. But once I got the trick down, I was able to pull it off, and I can pretty much do it at any point. They included the Blu-ray in this little paper sleeve, and I like that. I also like that they put a soft sleeve inside of it, so it doesn't get scratched up. There's like no danger of that. I don't care for the way that it is implemented in the packaging, because you're going to damage that sleeve taking it in or out, or there's a potential that you could damage the actual cover. So I wish that was done with a little bit more forethought. But other than that, I actually think the packaging is rather strong on this, and I think that that's another reason to buy this, is because it is a beautiful package. It takes you back to the original album version, which I like. I used to own this album on vinyl, and I always liked the aesthetics of it. So I think that that's a strength and a reason that justifies the cost for me. The actual liner notes, I think, could have been better, although they are informative. I learned things about this album that I didn't know before, so kudos for that. I just think that maybe they were a little on the gushing side and not particularly critical. And I also felt that there could have been more information about the extras included and why they were included and what was going on in them, because that context would have helped me a lot in appreciating them and ultimately reviewing them. But other than that, I think the packaging is pretty strong. I think it's, better than, say, the Bridge of Sighs box set, where I complained about the way the discs are included and that. So yeah, I would say overall this box set is quality. And I feel like it was worth the money. And that's the important thing whenever you buy something, is that you feel like you're getting what you paid for. So there is a lot to talk about here, and I'm going to try my best to break it down by each disc. However, I am going to try and focus mostly on the Atmos presentation, because that is why I'm here. I'm not so much interested in the vinyl or the remaster of the original. I'm interested in the spatial audio mix. So first up, thoughts on the vinyl. So the vinyl is pressed to a very sturdy material. I am happy with the actual quality of the physical product of the vinyl. The problem I have with it is that they used the 2024 Remaster on the vinyl, which is a little bit louder to my ears. It's a little bit more compressed. It's not bad sounding. In fact, I think that for most people it will do just fine. I just think that had I been putting this project together, I would have either used a flat transfer for the LP, or I would have used Steven Wilson's 2024 remix for the LP. But I'll kind of get to why later on, I hope. So with disc 2, we have Steven Wilson's stereo remix, which is a fold down of the Atmos mix. And it sounds quite good. In fact, listening to it in stereo, it rather replicates a lot of the Atmos placement in just 2 speakers. So I was rather impressed by that. I didn't play the instrumental mixes. I didn't think it was really necessary, but in listening to them, it's clear that they used the same source as the 2024 stereo mix for those. And on the Blu-ray, they are presented in stereo, not Atmos or 5.1. So moving on to disc 3, there are a few things in the Rarities that I think are rather interesting and worth mentioning. I didn't play the US single edits of Roundabout or Long Distance Runaround, and the reason for this is that I've heard them many times on compilations over the years. I'm familiar with these, and there's really not much to say about them. However, All Fighters Past, which is a Steven Wilson mix, this is a holdover from the previous issue of Fragile in 5.1, where they released this studio outtake. And it's rather fascinating because there are elements of this that became later Yes songs, including that phrase, All Fighters Past, which was used as a lyric in the Tales from Topographic Oceans album. It also has some ideas that were reused for Siberian Catru on Close to the Edge. So this kind of thing is really nice. And even though it's been previously released, I didn't have the 2024 version of Fragile, so I'm thrilled that it's included. We also have an early take of South Side of the Sky and a rehearsal take / early mix of Roundabout. Both of these are pretty fascinating. I will admit that it's a problem for me when these sets repeat material a lot. And the reason for this is that when I start having to try and detect the differences from one version to the next, it starts feeling a little bit too much like work to me. And that might be specifically a me thing because I work in music production and I'm used to having to listen to 2 different versions and spot the difference, basically. It's not something I can really do for fun. And however, with that caveat, I will say that this set does a good job with the multiple versions of tracks because I think it was well curated in a way that each one of the tracks is different enough. And there's like a different guitar sound. There's a little bit different, something different performance-wise that to me does make it fascinating because it's a window into Yes's process. If I have one gripe, it's that I wish there was more information on this in the liner notes. I wish they would have told us in the way that like the Jethro Tull box sets do, why they included these versions, because it would make things a lot less work on my part trying to figure out, spot the differences, essentially. But no, these are actually very much worth listening to, and especially with a song like Roundabout, which has been heard so many times, it's interesting to hear that their early takes were a little bit different. South Side of the Sky, in both the early take and the early version later on that Steven Wilson mixed, there's a different bridge, and it's more folky. The liner notes say that it's Tullish, but to me, it sounds more like Genesis a little bit. And I say a little bit because, if I'm being honest, it really only sounds like Yes. But at the same time, like, I'm kind of glad they snipped it because I think that the song that they ended up with is perfection. I think that they made the right choices. So here's another interesting one, Mood for Another Day. This is the full version of Steve Howe's acoustic guitar solo from the second side of the record. And it's got, again, material in it that was reused later on. I haven't heard Topographic Oceans enough to know exactly where things are, but I can hear the seeds of it in this track, is what I'm saying. And then also the All Fighters Past track. So that's rather a fascinating discovery, I think. The We Have Heaven full version is essentially the original We Have Heaven, the one that was included on the album, but I think they've edited in the coda from the end of Heart of the Sunrise into that, so you can hear the full 2.5 minutes. And it's mantra-like. It's rather cool to hear it as it originally was, but I think that they made the right choice in editing it and separating it as a track proper and then a coda, because I think it would have affected the album's pacing had they put this repetitive track, especially so early. Long Distance Runaround and Heart of the Sunrise, the Steven Wilson edits, I have no idea why these were included. They're basically just the songs we know and love, but shorter. I don't get it. I think this would have been something that would have been nice to point out in the liner notes. And there's nothing about it in the liner notes. The Roundabout Early Rough Mix, fascinating. But there's not a whole lot of replay value in this. There's some like distortion problems in it that, were sorted out by the final mix. And there's also a moment where John Anderson comes in a little bit early, and then later on there's a moment where Steve Howe comes in a little bit early. So I'm not really sure what the value in including this is. It was interesting to hear once, but I don't know if I'm going to return to it. Same for the We Have Heaven a cappella version. I think that, again, it's interesting to hear it picked out, from the backing, but what replay value this has is limited, at least for me. Okay, now we move on to Disc 4, More Rarities and Live. We have the 5% for Nothing alternate version, which to my ear wasn't very different. I mean, I didn't hear Wakeman's keyboard parts. That was about the only thing missing. Heart of the Sunrise alternate version. The first maybe 2 minutes of it seemed very similar to the album version, but everything after that was really different and maybe a little bit looser performance-wise. And that's something that I might say about all of these alternate and early versions, is that they're all looser and maybe the band is taking more chances, but it doesn't sound as confident as the album versions. So yeah, interesting for fans. There might be some cool things in there. What its replay value is to me, not sure. Long Distance Runaround, The Fish, the alternate version, I thought that was rather cool because The Fish has totally different leads from Chris Squire, and the bass parts are totally different. And I would point to that as one of the most interesting outtakes. Because it's extended and you can hear some of the other ideas that Chris was playing around with, and it kind of winds down. It doesn't end abruptly or fade out. I can't remember how it ends on the album, but it does come to like a gentle stop, and you hear a lot of tasty stuff that I've never heard before. So I rather enjoyed that. I think that's one of the stronger selections on this disc. The next track, The Dean, is perhaps the most puzzling element of this set because it's clearly a song by Terry Reid and not Yes. Somebody made a mistake. It's a horrible oversight, and it's kind of not cool to have someone else's song on this. And it makes me wonder if this is going to get pulled or go out of print or something. But yeah, you have the Instrumental of America, which I skipped. And then the last 3 tracks on disc 4 is unquestionably my favorite thing on the CDs. And that's 3 live performances taken from the Fragile tour of Long Distance Runaround and The Fish, Perpetual Change, and Yours Is No Disgrace. Now, I'm a little bit confused because Long Distance Runaround is only like the last 30 seconds of the piece. You just hear the last 30 seconds or so of that piece ending. But the version of The Fish is very extended, and it's not just a bass solo. It's actually a chance for Steve Howe and Chris Squire to kind of play off each other and improvise a little bit. And there was an element of danger and improvisation that I really enjoyed in that. And I enjoyed hearing how they changed it live. So that gets a huge thumbs up for me. Also, the performance of Perpetual Change is near perfect. It's near flawless. John Anderson's in good voice. The band has good energy. It's a great version. I can see me listening to it again. And I love the Yes album. It's actually might be my favorite of Yes's albums. And then finally, we have the Yours Is No Disgrace live version. And this was cool. It's a little bit looser than the album version. And I think this is owed to the fact that Rick Wakeman was a new member at the time, and maybe he was still trying to find his footing in the band. But it is fascinating to hear Rick on this song. And Steve Howe has a really nice elongated section where he gets to just go for it. And I honestly didn't know that Steve Howe played like this. Like, this almost is Zappa nasty guitar soloing. And it was just this whole other section that was added to it. And I really, really enjoyed hearing that. Again, like, this might be on one of Yes's live albums, but I never really dove too deep into Yes beyond the core catalog, at least the core 70s catalog. And so this was like kind of a new and fresh experience to me, and I really enjoyed it. And I learned something I didn't know about Yes, and that's that they have a heck of a guitar player. Their guitar player is one of the best. So moving on to the Blu-ray contents, this is the main draw for me, is the Blu-ray. And I've said on other reviews that oftentimes artists could release a standalone Blu-ray and I would be happy and probably save a lot of money. I don't know if that's how I feel about this set, but that kind of gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. Like, I'm most interested in Blu-ray audio and Atmos, especially, and 5.1 especially. So here's what's included. The 2024 Dolby Atmos mix, the 2024 5.1 mix, the 2024 stereo remix, the 2024 stereo remaster, and the 2024 instrumental mix. So all of these are mixed by Steven Wilson, with the exception of the 2024 stereo remaster, which is remastered by Bernie Grundman. It's not a poor master by any stretch of the imagination, and I think most people will probably do just fine with it. But for me, and this could be because I was listening to the spatial presentation, which is uncompressed, but to me, this sounds a little bit too heavy-handed in mastering, and it almost seems like the quieter bits are as loud, if not louder, than the louder parts of the song dynamically. And I noticed that on the vinyl too. There was a lot of sibilance on the vinyl, and John Anderson's voice in particular sounded very squeezed. And again, if there's one criticism I have before I gush, because I'm going to gush about one aspect of this set, but if there's one criticism I have, is that I wish that the flat transfers of the original master tapes were included with no extra mastering. Let us just hear it off the tapes. Because I think that had that been on the vinyl, I would have been a lot happier. As well as the original album. I think I would have preferred not to I think I would have preferred to not have the album remastered, is what I'm saying. And it would be much more congruous with the Steven Wilson mixes, which are famously not mastered. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to gush, because the Dolby Atmos mix is genuinely one of the most satisfying and complete sounding spatial audio mixes I've heard of any album, any artist, period. And I think this is some of Steven Wilson's best work in any format. So just general comments. Every instrument is transparent. The dynamics are, they're perfect. The acoustic guitars sound lifelike. Like, for instance, on Mood for a Day, Steve Howe sounds like he's sitting in the room. I swear I can hear his fingers touching the strings, and I can hear his breath. Like that is the level of clarity that this mix provides. With a song like Roundabout, that backwards note, you can hear it coming from back to front, and then the acoustic guitar appears in the height speakers. It is such a literal translation of what sounds have more and less prominence, the background and foreground sounds. So it's like if you want to imagine listening to this in headphones, and a sound seems like it's in the background, Wilson mixes it for the back speakers. If it sounds like it's centered, he mixes it in the center. If it sounds like it's coming from above, it's in the height speakers. If it sounds like it's directly in front of you and up front, it sounds like it's in left and right. It's a perfect translation of the album into a multiple channel setup. I have no criticisms. Chris Squire's bass is right up front. And you can, I can hear details I've never noticed before. I can detect his exact tones. Bill Bruford's drums are traveling all around the room. When he does those sweeps, you can hear him going from one channel to the next. Whenever you have any kind of vocal harmonies from John Anderson and Chris Squire and presumably Steve Howe together, they're evenly spread across the stereo spectrum. You have Rick Wakeman's organ sliding from one side to the other, and like the auxiliary percussion sections, they're traveling in a way that's impressive, but it's also logical and honoring of the original mix. And that's why I love it so much. For instance, like a song like, or a track like Cans and Brahms, I guess is how you'd pronounce it, Cans and Brahms, with a track like that, which in my opinion is very Wendy Carlos. It's like Wakeman doing Wendy Carlos, because you have parts that were originally played by string instruments and woodwinds being transferred to synthesizer and organ and keyboard. And it's beautiful. Like all of the parts are just spread out in a way that totally makes sense and just brings a smile to my face. You can hear every little piece. And there are moments in this record, and I'm going back to Roundabout, but there are moments of this record that have always sounded too heavy to me, like you couldn't really tell what was going on. And there's a moment in Roundabout like that where I can hear every single piece. I can hear everything. It's so clear. It's so defined. It's so delicious. Part of that, I think, is the fact that it is an analog recording, and you can kind of hear that tape. It still sounds like a tape, but it's spread out in a way that's very authentic. So I mentioned Cans and Brahms, Cons and Brahms. We Have Heaven is unquestionably one of the greatest things I've ever heard in this format. And you have John Anderson's, all of his overdubs are spread out evenly among the space. And I think it's a nice touch that when he yelps the yes, yes, it's jumping from speaker to speaker. So the first time you hear it, it's front left, and then you hear it again, it's front right, and then it jumps back here to, I guess, back right, and then finally back left, and it just goes around the room. It's a surroundabout. There's no other word for it. And, you have all those little tricks and toys that Bill Bruford's playing, appearing in different spots and corners and nooks. And it's perfect. There's no other word to describe this. It's absolutely a perfect use of rear speakers and moving things about and repositioning things. South Side of the Sky, again, that chugging nasty guitar tone from Steve Howe, and it's sitting right at the back of your head, where it sounds like maybe a lot of the piano and organ is at the front. There's a moment in this near the end where it sounds like somebody slams the door and gets up and walks away, and it's very much like On the Run, the Pink Floyd track. And that's what it sounds like. It sounds like somebody slams the door like over in this corner and walks over here and then leaves out the back. It's just, it's unbelievable. I had to play it a couple of times to just believe that I was hearing and not imagining it. It's that immaculate. Then you have a pair of tracks like Long Distance Runaround and The Fish. The segue between those two songs is one of the coolest things I've ever heard in this format, with those notes just kind of floating toward the ceiling, and then when the guitar comes in, it's right up front. The band joins in behind. I had to back that up several times to make sure that I wasn't imagining it, because, again, when I used to listen to this album in headphones, that's the way the positioning worked. And to have that replicated in the room, it feels like the album is part of my environment. And I love that. This is immersion of the highest quality. It really is. Mood for a Day, I think I mentioned that Hal's guitar just sounds so lifelike. It's not a great album. It's not a great track to demonstrate your system on, to impress your friends or anything, because it's just an acoustic guitar, but it just sounded so good and lifelike and real. That's the word I would use is real. And it sounds like it was recorded yesterday. This whole album does. This whole album sounds so fresh to me. Heart of the Sunrise. The one thing I wanted to point out about this one is that you have a lot of times Hal's in the back, which is rather unusual because most of the time you want guitars up front. But I think that that's right for Yes. Hal's often in the back, but in this song in particular, it seems like he and Rick Wakeman are doing battle with one another. So sometimes Hal's in the back, Wakeman's in the front, and then sometimes they switch. The guitar's in the front and the organ's in the back. And then when it ends, there's some overdubs, harmonies that Steve Howe put on, and the existing tracks are already going in the back, and then those overdubs shimmer in the front. And I was just like, wow, this is such a treat to listen to, because it was put together by someone who cares that this album matters to them. And that is so important and so beautiful and inspiring to me. I can hear Steven Wilson's love for this material oozing out of his mixes. He cares, and that's why I love it. Not much to say about the reprise of We Have Heaven that I didn't already say. It's still, in my opinion, like I would use that track to demonstrate my system. Either the first track or the reprise. I would use that to demonstrate the system. It's that cool and transparent and separated. And finally, the extra track America, which I'm a little bit confused as to why it was included, simply because I always associated it more with Close to the Edge. And there is a video for this, and I had kind of hoped that when that track was eventually released in Atmos, that they would also include the video. Because wouldn't that be cool to sit and watch them recording it in the studio, synced to the album track in Dolby Atmos? That's something similar to what Gentle Giant have done with releases like Interview. And I think that's a missed opportunity. It's really a missed opportunity, especially with a Blu-ray. You could have included that video footage, and I think that would have been really neat. Comments on the Atmos mix of America. I compared this to the 5.1 mix that's on Close to the Edge, and I like it a little bit better on Close to the Edge. And I don't know why this is. There's something about the 5.1 that makes it sound closer, more immediate, and punchier, whereas the Atmos mix seems more distant and reverby. And I know that there's two different versions. I know there's like a drier version and a reverbed version, but it sounds to me like the Atmos mix has more reverb, and it's also lower in volume. It's still a great track. I absolutely love Yes's take on the Simon and Garfunkel tune. I've never heard the original, so I know that some people say that, yeah, it's good, but the original's better. But I feel that as a piece of music, it's compelling, and I love giving Steve Howe the opportunity to play some country guitar, because again, that's something that isn't well utilized by progressive rock bands. Most progressive rock bands don't want to touch country music, but I always thought that something that made Yes unique is that Steve Howe included those influences. That's something I love about them, and I don't care for it that they kind of stopped doing that. After like Close to the Edge, they really didn't do that much more of it. So yeah, it's a strong track. I just happen to prefer the 5.1 mix for some reason. All right, so with that in mind, I am going to just kind of recap everything I've said, a quick overview. So the original album remastered on disc 1 and on the vinyl, in my opinion, is too heavy-handed in terms of mastering, so I'm not crazy about it. I wished that a flat transfer of the album had been included either on the Blu-ray or disc 1 of the box set or the vinyl. I disagree with the choice to use a remastered version of the original mix. So basically there's no, in my opinion, there's no great version of the original mix included, and that is an oversight. Disc 2, the Steven Wilson 2024 remixes and instrumentals. I think this disc sounds fantastic. It doesn't sound as good as the actual Atmos mix because it is a little bit louder, but I still think it sounds a lot better than the original album remaster. In lieu of including the flat transfer, I wish that they would have used the Steven Wilson 2024 remix on the vinyl. So that's my final opinion on that. Disc 3, Rarities. My favorite tracks here are as follows: All Fighters Past, Mood for Another Day. I also will add that I rather enjoy the rehearsal run-through of Roundabout because it is a little bit different. And it's a new version of a well-beloved and potentially even overheard classic. And so I did find this to be one of my favorite things. It's probably my least favorite of those 3 items I just mentioned, but I do think it's a standout and worth mentioning. And on disc 4, I liked the alternate version of The Fish because you could hear Chris Squire experimenting with different ideas for leads and stuff. The Dean, track 4, disc 4, shouldn't have been on there. It has no business being on here. And that is definitely one of the major flaws of this set that I hope is addressed at some point. And then finally, we end on a high note with the CDs with the 3 live versions included of Long Distance Runaround / The Fish, Perpetual Change, and Yours Is No Disgrace. Those are all excellent, and I would argue that of all the content included on the CDs, those 3 tracks plus the All Fighters Past track are my favorite things. Aside from that, the Dolby Atmos mix is phenomenal. It's one of the greatest things I've ever heard in this format. The only thing that I might say is a little bit better is maybe Steven's Lark's Tongues and Aspic Atmos mix is maybe a little bit better, but this is close. And the 5.1 mix I noticed is louder by nature, and I think that this is because Dolby Atmos has certain conditions that you have to deliver an unmastered mix. So there is the feeling like the 5.1 mix is a little punchier. So I do like that it was included. I kind of wish that they would have included the 2014 surround mix. And the reason for that is that I never owned it, and I would kind of like to compare it to the Atmos mix. But, who knows? Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe they just included the 2014 mix because that would have been so much easier and potentially cheaper. Just reissue what we had before, and I'd have been fine with that. So I think that about wraps up my thoughts on this. The Fragile Super Deluxe Edition by Yes. Do I recommend it? Well, I suppose that depends. It is expensive. The retail price is around $100. And I understand why this is hard to justify for some people, especially if you've already purchased the 2014 Steven Wilson remix of this album. In my case, I hadn't. I waited a long time to get those, and by the time I decided that I wanted them, Fragile was out of print. And the 2014 version of Fragile used goes for just about the same price as this box goes new. I thought, well, if I have to spend $100 for a used version, why not spend that on this new version with the whistles and bells. I hadn't owned any copy of this album in a while, any copy at all. And I used to have the original vinyl. I had the Mobile Fidelity Soundlabs Gold Disc, and I had the 2023 Remaster. This is one of my favorite albums, but I didn't have it anymore. So I was more than happy to add this to my collection and to have it on multiple formats. Again, I think that's cool. But I would recommend it only if you don't have the 2014 remix. I just would maybe avoid the original album remastered. I don't think it sounds that great. And I don't think the vinyl sounds that great. So if vinyl is your bag, if that's what you're looking for, you might not want this. You might want to look elsewhere, but that's just my opinion. Also, if you don't have the 2014 Wilson remix, I think that some of these extras are worth listening to for Yes aficionados, because again, you get to learn how these tracks connect to later Yes projects. So I do think that's fascinating, and I do think that the live tracks are worth having. I just wish there was more of them. That might be simply a case that they weren't available, but I think that a complete live disc would have been nice to include. So with that in mind, I think that about wraps up what I wanted to say here. I also wanted to use this moment to thank the influx of subscribers that I've had within the past couple of weeks. I have reached my first milestone as a YouTube channel. I have crossed the 500 subscribers threshold. I want to thank you so much for deciding to support this channel and see what else I've got to say. I really greatly appreciate that. I am planning a collection video to commemorate this, because I've had a couple of people ask me to show off my collection. Those videos are a lot of work to make, but I think since I've reached this milestone and potentially the interest is there, I think I'm going to do it for you folks. So look for that to come. I've decided to create an Amazon wish list because when I started my business, I had to sell a lot of my CDs and vinyl to build capital while I was, building a resume. And now, I'm working, consistently, and I'd like to collect some of that back, and I have already, but there's still a lot that I would like to have that I don't have. So I've created an Amazon wish list, and I will include it in the description. And if any of you watching would like to support the channel with a donation, you may purchase something from this wish list. Now, just because it's on Amazon doesn't mean you have to buy from Amazon. I would suggest supporting smaller dealers like Laser CD or Wayside Music, but you can use the Amazon list as a guide for donations. So yeah, and there's different things. Like there's stuff that's close to $200 on there, and there's stuff that's like $5 or $6. So there's different levels of donation should you choose. Also, last thing I want to mention, since this is a vinyl video, is that my band Colouratura have a vinyl record out. This is WTF Was That by, once again, Colouratura. This is a art rock album that's influenced by a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about, especially Frank Zappa and Jethro Tull. I play flute on it, and there's some bluesy heavy guitar from my friend Derek Pavlik. So if you like this kind of music, I would like to ask you to at least give this a listen and maybe consider supporting it by purchasing an album. I would really appreciate that. All right. Well, that brings me to the end of it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope that there was enough in here that could help you make an informed choice whether to purchase this or not. Because it's for me, but it's not necessarily going to be something that every Yes fan is going to want to pay for. In fact, there's actually a lot of stuff here that's been previously released, so it may not be for everyone. But yeah, the last thing to do is to remind you that if you like this video, please give it a like, because that helps in visibility and getting my word out there. Also, I would appreciate if you subscribed to the channel because it could update you on future releases. I plan to talk about my own work and my own production work, as well as talk about CD collecting, vinyl collecting, new releases when they come, although that could be difficult, to keep up with things financially. I don't know how much of that I want to do. But for stuff that interests me, I'm going to try and cover it because I really do enjoy it. And finally, please do leave a comment about your impressions of this box set. What are you most excited about? If you got it, how are you liking that Atmos mix? I would love any kind of interaction with you, the viewer, because that's what this is all about. This is all about finding a community on the internet. All right. That is it for me for today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Once again, my name's Ian Beabout, and from Shed Sounds Media, see you soon. Bye-bye.